Your school has a fantastic reputation, and I once sat in a chair like this. I remember having a class like this at Cornell. It was called Cookies with Clark. It was a lecture series, and they served cookies, and that made it very popular. But it was one of the more memorable classes I had because it was always good to hear how people got to where they were. So that's what I'll try and do today. First off, a little bit more about Biaggi's for those of you who haven't been to one, beyond what we say up there. Biaggi's is a pretty sophisticated looking restaurant, sharply appointed, and high skill variable in the kitchen. Certainly more complicated than most chain restaurants. We bake our own breads, we make our own sauces, we make our own desserts. It's a large menu. There's a lot of equipment and a lot of space in the kitchen. We have chefs, not kitchen managers. So as chain restaurants go, we don't fit the typical mode because we are very complicated. Dining room is pretty sharply appointed. Servers, are in white shirts, crisply starched. We crumb tables. We have 35 wines by the glass. We have a reserve wine list that usually has about 60 or 70 more selections. We have private rooms. We do a lot of business entertaining in addition to casual dining. And when we started the company, it was to focus on smaller markets in the Midwest. Third-tier markets, roughly 150,000 to 500,000 population base. Communities that are primarily a white-collar workforce, not manufacturing. Big enough to support something like this, yet small enough that they fly below the radar screen of a lot of other upscale casual national chains. For example, most of the markets that we focused on early on didn't have a P.F. Chang's, didn't have a Maggiano's, didn't have a Macaroni Grill, because they considered those markets too small and risky. Whereas for us, we wanted to pick the right markets in small and risky. So that's what Biaggi's is. I'm going to go over two things and try and keep it within the time frame of your class. One, I'm going to take you from how I got to your seat to my seat and some of the choices I made along the way, and hopefully hit on some things that I think are important for all of you to know about what I do for a living and what has made me successful. And then I'm going to talk about how we started the company. The basic blocking and tackling of starting a chain restaurant when you are not a division of a large company, which we were not. We were just a couple of guys starting a company, and how we got from that to being an $80 million company over the last 12 years. So that's what I'm going to do, and then hopefully leave a little time at the end for some questions. Like Dr. Gaselli said, I've been working in the restaurant business since 1977. I was 14, got a job in a Friendly's. Anybody here know Friendly's? All right. I had a little paper hat, worked the carryout window, and loved my job. It was great. I grew up loving athletics, and restaurants are a lot like sports. You got all the different positions and players. Managers are kind of like coaches. If everybody knows their position and is a good player, it flows. If everybody is dysfunctional, doesn't know their position, you get creamed by the customer when they come in, and it's brutal. And the restaurant business is the same way, and I love it for that reason, among many others. And so worked in restaurants all through high school, said maybe I'll go to school for this and be a restaurateur. So I got into the hotel school at Cornell, and I went, and that's really all about I knew at that point in time. I knew I liked restaurants, and now I'm studying it. I'm a freshman at Cornell. I had no idea what I was going to do with my career, how to get to somewhere with my career, or even where somewhere was that I wanted to get to. I was pretty much lost, other than knowing I liked to work in a restaurant. Fortunately, 4 years of education helped me sort of fine-tune what I wanted to go after, and I knew that I wanted to stay in restaurant, not food service. I didn't want to get into hotels. I just wanted to be restaurant. Took a job when I graduated from college with a chain restaurant company called the American Cafe in 1985, moved to Washington, D.C. My first job out of college, right in the middle of Georgetown, great place to work, great place to live, so much nightlife that I never got a chance to see. I was the closing manager of a restaurant whose kitchen was open until 3 a.m. on weekdays and 4 a.m. on weekends. So I worked from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. 6 nights a week, fresh out of college. It was great. So here's my first takeaway for you. If you find yourself in a job, fresh out of college, that isn't exactly ideal, and you're going, I don't like this. This is not fun. Why did I choose this career? I was doing that, okay? Keep in mind, that's entry level. That's your journeyman apprentice work. It gets better. Do not judge the hospitality industry based on the entry level leadership opportunities in the hospitality industry. Because as you stay with the business, you do get to a work rhythm that is conducive to having a life outside of work, a family, and being home for dinner. Okay, those things happen in our business. You just got to stick with it. So worked for them, then moved from one employer to a next, like many young people do. I wanted to learn, and you know, if you work for different employers, you take away different things, and I did, and worked for some great companies. The Clyde's Restaurant Group in Washington, D.C. I ran the Old Ebbitt Grill, which is Washington, D.C.'s busiest restaurant. It does about $20 million a year. When I was the general manager there, it did about $12 million. I was 27, and I was way over my head in that job. Was not ready for it, but still got by, hustled, and then went to work for Morton's, which is a steakhouse chain, and was at Morton's when I was approached by a couple of guys who were customers. At this point, I'm 29 years old, working for a large publicly traded restaurant chain, and these two customers, Fred Berman and Artie Altshuler, both in their late 60s, come to me and say, hey, we want to start a restaurant chain, and we want you to do it with us. And I said, great, I don't have any money to invest. And they said, not a problem. We'll give you 10% of the company if you just get it going. I said, deal. So there we were. We started a company called That's Amore. Now, they had a business plan. It was a loose business plan. They wrote it on the back of a beverage napkin. And so we scrubbed up that business plan a little. I kid about the bev napkin, but it was not much further than that. We scrubbed up the business plan, and we sold shares to investors to raise some capital. And we opened our first That's Amore in 1992. And That's Amore was family-style Italian, so platters to share, sort of a Little Italy feel, menu boards on the wall. You know the format. You see it in a lot of concepts now, Maggiano's, Buca di Beppo. But back then, not many people were doing it. From 92 to 98, we grew that to 7 locations. And I was one of the general partners and the chief operating officer, and had a really good gig. You know, I wasn't working for the man, I was the man. It felt great. My partners are now in their early 70s, though, and I'm in my early 30s, and we're on different career paths. You know, for them, you know, it was about a monthly dividend check. For me, it was about let's reinvest the capital and let's grow the resources. And so they were great guys to work with and really supportive. If I was doing a good job, they were the first ones to pat me on the back. If I was doing a bad job, they were still patting me on the back. And that's only good for a short period of time. Synergy is really important. And I didn't have that, professional synergy. I wasn't working with a team of really smart and challenging people. So I get introduced to this guy, Todd Hovenden, who is my partner now, CEO of Biaggi's, and a brilliant guy. And we talk on the phone. I was doing a favor for an executive recruiter by talking to him. I wasn't looking for a job. I was just giving advice. And we talked for 4 hours. And oh my gosh, did we hit it off. You know, we're about the same age, we're into similar things, but his background's all financial. He had never worked in a restaurant. He had a great business plan, though, but we really had it intellectually. It was really, really thrilling. And it was, I remember the conversation was like late 97, early 98, and I got off the phone, and my wife was a little annoyed because I was supposed to be going somewhere, doing something with her, and she said, well, you know, what was that all about? And I said, do you know where Bloomington, Illinois is? And keep in mind, she grew up in Washington. Had friends from high school she talked to every week, loved Washington, never wanted to leave, okay? I said, do you know where Bloomington, Illinois is? She said, no, why? I said, I think we're moving. And we ended up getting divorced because a life not lived for work is a life not lived. And I'm kidding, just making sure you're with me here, all right? Everybody awake? Okay. Said my 23rd wedding anniversary, we're doing great, all right? And we met in a restaurant. We met in a restaurant. I was a manager. She was a server. I don't recommend it typically, but it worked out well for me. So I had to talk her into moving to Bloomington, Illinois. And you go, okay, here I've got this company that I own 10% of. It's a good thing. We're making good money. I'm making a good living. I'm proud of it. I'm running it. My partners are good guys. DC's a great city. Why would I leave and move to Bloomington, Illinois to start over? Okay? And synergy is the answer to that question. I didn't have it with my previous partners. Now I've got a chance to start a company with a guy who had an amazing financial background. He had been a financial analyst for Taco Bell for 7 years, and then they made a deal with the Russians to put Taco Bell kiosks in all the subway stations of Moscow. So he's in charge of administration of that, did that for a couple of years, came back, got his MBA at Northwestern, wrote the business plan when he was in college, really sharp guy. And so we've got synergy. I'm going to do this. And for me, it was a chance to take everything I had learned. And let me tell you, I made a lot of mistakes starting that Zamore, okay? Because I was 29 years old, you know, and I did so many things wrong. It was a chance to go back and get a redo and do everything right, which is really exciting, with a partner who brings a lot to the table on the financial side and better capitalized, better business plan, et cetera. So sell our house in Washington, move to Bloomington, Illinois, buy a house. So we've got a family and a mortgage, and Todd moves down from Chicago, family, mortgage, and a business plan. And at that point, we had raised, you know, about $500,000 he had raised, because I hadn't been in the money-raising game with him yet. He had raised about $500,000 selling shares to investors in this LLC, which isn't nearly enough money. So I had a full head of hair then, okay? These are nervous times, because when you're doing that, we're paying ourselves salaries, but we're paying it out of the invested capital. And we need that money to get the restaurant open. And by the way, we have to create this concept. You know, business plan is a long ways from actual building and concept. So I moved out there in July of '98, all right? So now let me segue into Biaggi's. That business plan, when Todd first wrote it, to focus on the third-tier markets, upscale Italian casual concept, nice enough for business entertaining, casual enough and approachable enough in price for casual dining, and focus on third-tier markets in the Midwest. The pitch to investors was, invest in this limited liability company and let us hold on to your money, okay? Because we're going to grow this concept to 20 locations, and then we're either going to sell it or we're going to go public, and that's when you'll get your return. And hopefully it'll be many multiples of what you invested. So that's how we sold shares. Now, as a limited liability company, we're not publicly traded, so none of you can go and buy stock in Biaggi's right now. It's not publicly traded. To invest in an LLC, you have to be an accredited investor, which means you either have to have $250,000 a year in earnings, or you have to have a net worth of $1 million or more. And by that, it allows the SEC to not regulate how you sell the shares, because they presume at that income level that it is an educated investor. So we sold shares in $50,000, you know, tranches to accredited investors with the plan of growing this chain. I did not put a penny into this company, okay, other than taking the risk of moving my family and signing a mortgage in Bloomington, Illinois, and my partner didn't put money into the company. We got and we are the two largest stockholders, we got our ownership for doing the work. So there's a lesson there for all of you who have know-how, who will have expertise and leadership. You can get ownership without investing, because the investors need you. People with money want to make money with their money, okay? You'll be the jockey, and the concept will be the horse, and they'll give you the money. So for me, you look at Todd and I, and we're very different. There might be some entrepreneurs in the room. There might be some great visionaries here, writers of business plans. And there also might be in the room some really great leaders. Todd got his equity for thinking about the concept, writing a business plan, and attracting me, and attracting investors. I got my equity for being a proven leader who could make it come to life. Okay? So different ways to get what you want. And that's how I got my thing twice with two companies. I didn't put money in. I was pulled in and given the equity because I had proven that I can run restaurants well. So we did that. We sold shares, and you know, after I came on, the ability to raise money accelerated, because now we have an organization and somebody who's run a restaurant before. That helps. Investors like to see that. So then after we'd raised a little bit more money, we were able to go to a bank and get a bank loan. Bank gave us $1 million on the strength of a business plan. That does not happen every day. Because usually, you know, when you say to a banker, yeah, I need money, a restaurant, they go, oh, look at the time. Yeah, nice talking to you. you know, sometimes bankers look at restaurants as a little risky. So we got a bank, and we still bank with this bank, Busey Bank, great bank. They gave us $1 million. And so now we're at about $2 million, and that's still not enough, really, because we're going to use most of that to open the first location, and we want to open other locations. And now we've got his salary, my salary. Shortly thereafter, I hired a corporate chef, and then we hired a controller. So we've got 4 people, we've got corporate offices that we're paying rent on, and we've got a bunch of desks and copiers and computers and equipment and all that stuff. We've got all of this stuff with no money coming in, okay? Very tense. So we've got to keep raising money because we're paying for ourselves to figure this concept out, and we have to have money to get the first location open. So we sign a lease, find a landlord, and the way we did it is so we said, let's take less risk and use less capital and grow faster. And the best way to do that for us was to have landlords build our restaurants for us. So we would go to a landlord, somebody who wanted to be our landlord, somebody with a piece of property in Bloomington, and say, here's the deal. This is Biaggi, this is our concept. We'd show them the color boards and what a fantastic thing it was going to be, our architect renditions, everything. We'd have them mesmerized with our Jedi tricks and get them to go, all right, I'll build your building for you. They'd put up the land, do the parking lot, build the entire building to our specifications, and lease it back to us. Okay? Very common model in chain restaurants. Most chain restaurants do that. Very few chain restaurants own their buildings. Now, they weren't doing this for free. They would spend all this money, and the money that they invested then drives how big the lease is. So obviously, if it costs them $2 million in land value and construction of the building, that $2 million is going to be paid off as part of our lease. It just makes the lease higher, okay? But it's a lower risk way of borrowing in essence. So that's how we did it. So what remained for us, really, is about $1 million or so, you know, which is furniture, fixtures, equipment, because they didn't put that stuff in, pre-opening costs like, you know, training, hiring and training your managers and hiring and training staff, all those kind of things, legal fees, all that. So that would cost us about $1 million. So what we would do to get this $1 million for every location we'd open is that we'd use about half of it from, well, in the beginning, invested capital, and half from bank debt. And then as we opened, our first location did really, really well. It was cash flowing really positively. So from that point forward, we used cash flow, internally driven cash flow, as half of it, and the other half bank debt. And we didn't have to sell too many shares. We had to sell a few shares, you know, about a year after we opened, our share value went from $1 to $3. Now if you want to invest, it costs $3 a share. And here's a piece of advice, by the way. You ever start a company, okay, and you're going to sell shares to investors, and in all likelihood it'll be a limited partnership or an LLC, so they'll have to be accredited investors, and you'll do it with like a minimum of $25,000 or a minimum of $50,000 investment, something like that. When you value the share, value it at $1, okay? And you can always adjust how many shares it is. Because if you value it at anything other than $1, they always want to know how you got to the valuation of a share. And it really doesn't matter because it's just a business plan. It's not what the value start is, it's where the value goes. So $1 per one share, $50,000 gets you 50,000 shares. In the total number of shares, they can see what their equity is and do the math quicker. If it's a 1-to-1 ratio, it's a good place to start. So within about a year, we are still raising some equity because we didn't have quite enough for the accelerated growth we were looking at. So we sold shares at $3. Much better. More money, less equity given out. That's a good thing. The day that we opened our first location, we broke ground for our second in Champaign, Illinois. So there was no turning back. We didn't have time to go, well, let's see how the first one does. And if it does well, then we'll do a second one. Because, you know, we're paying a whole bunch of people at the corporate office. That one restaurant isn't going to support it. So it was grow or die. And so we grew. So we broke ground for the second one, and we continued like that, okay? Very little equity sales, but mostly capitalizing it out of working cash flow and a little bit of bank debt. And, you know, that was 1999 when we opened Bloomington, and we just opened our 24th location in Carmel, Indiana. Anybody here from Carmel? Or Indianapolis know Carmel? Opened up about a month ago at the Clay Terrace Shopping Center. Go dine there, please. We need your support. So we're 24 restaurants now. We've got 2,000 employees, and as such, everything else grows along the way. You know, we have 3 area directors of operations who oversee the locations operationally. We have a marketing department, an IT department, a purchasing department, an accounting department, corporate chef, you name it, we've got a department for it, human resources, and it's a good team. You know, one of the nice things about being privately held is that you can make long-term decisions and stick by them even when the short term does not look so good by that decision. For example, you know, through a recession, you know, it's very difficult when in the United States restaurant sales were really slumping through 2007, 8, 9, and you know, publicly traded companies were under a lot of pressure to still show a really healthy bottom line and growth. Well, in order to do that, when their sales were down, that forced them, many chain restaurants, to have to cut costs dramatically because they had to maintain their share value as a publicly traded company. And you know what happens in a restaurant when you cut costs? Oftentimes it means the quality of your offerings go downhill. We didn't have to do that. In fact, through the recession, we said, you know what? Let's just not open restaurants for a couple of years. And we didn't really have anybody to approve that. We don't even have a board. We just had to say, do you want to open a restaurant? No, it's a recession. I don't want to open a restaurant. Okay. You don't either? Great, let's not open a restaurant. So we didn't open any restaurants for a couple of years, but that doesn't mean we didn't do anything, okay? Because it was a recession, we had some great opportunities. One, we were still making money, good money, and we had a lot of cash. Not many people had cash in a recession, and since we had cash, we could also borrow money. So we tried to buy a few companies. You know, it's a recession, sales are down, some struggling companies, the value goes way down because they really need to sell. So we figured good time to put our money to work. So we did the due diligence in trying to buy 2 different companies, never got the deal done. Really complicated process. Both times got to a point of value that we thought was reasonable, that they thought was too low, and didn't get it done. Learned a lot. Recession, you know, we're going through that, holding on to our money, trying to buy a company. Never happens. Sales start to return. Recession's ending, or it feels like it's ending. I don't know, is it ending? We're still uncertain about that. And so we started growing again and opening more locations. Now, coming out of the recession, we did it a little differently. You know, before the recession, everything was like I described before. The new construction, landlord builds the building, leases it back for you. Well, after the recession, not a lot of landlords building shopping centers who want to build your building for you. In fact, nobody was building malls. So the new location model, there wasn't as many people who wanted to do that. But there's a whole lot of empty restaurants because a lot of restaurants went out of business, and some of them in very good locations with very nice facilities. So the last 3 locations that we've done coming out of the recession have been second generation space, where we've taken over an existing restaurant, gutted it, rebuilt, but that still saves a lot of money from new construction because, you know, you reuse a lot of the plumbing and the HVAC, the hood systems, all that stuff's really expensive. You can reuse it. And in this market, landlords will really give you a good lease because there's so much empty space. So that's how we've leveraged our position coming out of the recession. And like I said, Carmel is the 24th. You know, a couple of things, I guess, through both those stories, my story and the Biaggi story, that resonate for me. One, on the leadership side, you know, leadership is the one thing that programs like this, I think, should focus the most attention on teaching. Unfortunately, it is the one thing that is so difficult to teach in a classroom because it's so conceptual. It's not a specifically designed science. And, you know, many of you will go out there, and regardless of what aspect of the industry you choose, whether it's tourism, restaurants, rooms, travel, most of it, the vast majority of it, is high staffing. A large amount of employees per dollar of sale, which means a huge part of all of your future is going to be getting people to do something correctly. And there are many ways you can go about that. When I first got out of college, I went about it the worst way. I was Johnny Hustle. I was going to follow up and make sure everybody was doing everything correctly. I was Mr. Enforcement, Mr. Spec. I'm going to get them. They're all going to march. And I would hustle around trying to get everybody to be compliant. And I would overmanage everything, okay? Time and wisdom, however, teaches you to lead instead of manage. Leading being the process of taking time to articulate why the correct procedures and behaviors are important, why they benefit the employee, why we're going to be busier if we follow them, and doing it in a way that people go, I like the way he or she said that, and you know what, I get it now, I'm in. And then they feel like they work in a smarter environment. They feel more committed and engaged, and then you don't have to manage them. That skill set, being that person who can do that, who can express things in a way that make people engage on the work. There's not really that many people who can do that. But if you can do that, if each and every one of you can do that, you will be extraordinarily successful with your career. Because you can achieve anything then. You feel like you can, and you get noticed. My opportunities have been granted to me, really, because I worked hard, and because I worked hard at that. Because people noticed that I could lead well, so they gave me more leadership opportunities. So focus on that. Get great at describing why. Your generation, needs why more than any workforce that I have encountered since 1977, and it's great. Once upon a time, you could get away with do it. Why? Because. Just do it. And people did it because, you know, that was the culture. You felt like, you know, you had to keep your nose down and work harder, you'd lose your job, and people approach work that way. In today's world, everybody wants to know why something makes sense. But once you do, I tell you, the video game generation is committed. It's kind of like playing a video game. Somebody gives you a cheat on it on how to get to the next level. You're going to use it every time, you know, because it makes sense. Give your employees the cheats. Give them the ways that it makes sense. Be somebody who's great at expressing that. They will love you for it, and they will want to work for you forever because you're building their skills when you do that. Because people believe now, not many people believe in job security. There's really not that much of it. But skill enhancement, well, either way, whether you stay or you go, either way, that's something you get to take with you. Be that person that makes people smarter. It will serve you well. Hire well. Staffing. I tell you, here's a quick story. When we started the company, we thought we were really great hires when we'd open a new restaurant because we would have like 8 or 9 of our best interviewers in the recruiting office. People who were so good at talking to people that they could coax the magic out of anybody. So we would really find the essence and the beauty of every human being coming into our recruiting office. And we'd really get to know them. And we thought that that was great interviewing. That was a terrible idea. We were so outgoing that we found the nice stuff in everybody, which meant that everybody could get hired. You don't want everybody. You want the best people when you're putting a team together. Don't compromise in hiring. If you can be the world's greatest leader or the world's greatest hirer, be the world's greatest hirer. Because then you don't need to lead. All the people in this room, you go out of here, you work for a bad employer who doesn't treat you well and gives you poor training, and you'll probably all still succeed in your job, despite that. You should have nothing but that in your employees as well. You know, if you're living and working in a market area of, you know, several million people in a big city, and you only need 100 for a restaurant, presumably you can find 100 people out of 1 million, all of whom are committed, focused, responsible, and have integrity. Don't settle for anything but that. So we reversed our hiring. And now the way we hire is that we interview to talk ourselves out of people and not talk ourselves into them. Basically, you walk up to an interview, you shake their hand, you look them in the eye, in the first 10 seconds you're making so much assessment about a person. They're healthy, they're vibrant, they make eye contact, there's confidence, there's warmth, there's hospitality. They exude that all immediately. You go, I want to hire this person. You always want to feel in the first 10 seconds that you want to hire this person. And if you don't feel that way in the first 10 seconds, move on. Yes, they might be a great person, but what you got in the first 10 seconds is probably what their coworkers and their guests are going to get. Okay? You then use the interview to see if everything else is there, if they have integrity, if they were, telling the truth about their resume, if they're a person of good character, all of those things. You focus on that. So, hiring, okay? Don't compromise. Where are we at? Anybody got any questions? All right, well, I got a great story then. Where's my water? Data. This is another piece of advice. Back when I ran restaurants as a general manager, I was very anti-reports. I was one of those guys like, hey, if you can't see it with your own eyes, then you don't belong in the business. I didn't need reports. I was a man of the people. I was there to see what was happening in my operation, and I thought I saw it all. You don't. When you're in an operation, any kind of operation, your emotions and what you want to see is often going to guide what you see. And you're going to see things oftentimes the way you want to see them. I didn't know that when I was a younger person. Back in about 2001, our managers, or I'm sorry, our servers in our Bloomington location approached me and said, we really want to be able to add tips to tables of 6 or more. Now, we never do that at Biaggi's. You go in with a party of 15, we're not adding a tip to your check. Okay? We're rolling the dice. Well, our servers really wanted to be able to do it on parties of 6 or more because they said, we get all these split checks from people from State Farm and we're getting killed on it. And I said, I think it's a mistake. I think that you're only remembering the times when you didn't get a good tip and you're forgetting all the times where somebody gave you 25%. And they're not going to do that when you give them the tip. Not that many people write in extra tip. So, but I said, let me figure out a way to measure it and we'll give it a shot. So I thought about it. Now, how can I see if they're making less or more tips? And well, I can't go based on what they declare because we know they lie to the IRS sometimes. I've heard that. So we're not going to go on that. That's not usable data. But credit cards. Ooh. 90% of our business is in credit cards. And everybody who pays in a credit card, you have the base amount, then you have the tip amount. And they're separated in the transactions. So if I divide the tips, all the tips on lump by all the base amounts, we know what the average tip percentage is for the credit card sales, which is 90% of our business, so presumably that's reflective of all the business. So we started measuring the credit card tips. And we put it on an Excel spreadsheet. This is before we had an IT department, so we didn't have the fancy reporting and analysis that we do now. And it was really interesting. We didn't just do it for the restaurant, we did it for every employee. Okay? Wow. What an eye-opener. All right? Now, we're talking about lots of data. You can't look at one shift or 1 week because you could have one really good table that's big spender or a bad table and it throws your whole average off. But when you look at it for 6 months on a server and each server has like $50,000, $60,000 worth of credit card sales, well then the numbers become more of a realistic average and indication of the quality of their service. And we're looking at these people and it's like, some of them are averaging, 19, 20%, and some of them are averaging like 15, 16%. And these are on like 60,000 in credit card sales, and I'm going, oh my gosh, why have I never looked at this number before? This is awesome. I mean, there's got to be a difference in the customer satisfaction between the person who averages 20% and the person who averages 15% on $50,000 worth of credit cards. There's got to be a difference. This person's got to be doing something better. And the interesting thing was, with me, Mr. Hey, if you can't see it yourself, then, you shouldn't be in the business. The people who were at the top weren't all the people I thought. Yeah, about 3/4 of them I could have guessed right, but some of the others weren't. And some of the people at the bottom were people that I thought were really good. They had a good uniform, made a good presentation, laughed at my jokes, figured they must be good, doing well. I don't get many complaints, thought they would be great. They were way down here. So it took about a month before the server said, you were right, the whole add a tip thing was a mistake, we don't want to do it anymore. I'm like, good. But that number stayed as a really important part of our culture, and it grew. First thing we did is we started posting it in all of our locations, where you'd see they'd update it every week, the server ranking. Now, we'd only show the names of the top 10, and below that, we'd just use employee number. That way we're not, embarrassing the bottom feeders. because you don't want to embarrass anybody, you want to motivate them. So we just show the numbers, and just by posting it, the numbers started rising. You know, because the people at the top are like competitive. They want to even get their numbers higher. The people at the bottom are going, what am I doing wrong? You know, because they actually, for them it's the best news. They have the most opportunity. You can look at it and go, oh my gosh, I can be making so much more money. Look at how much higher these people's tips are. What are you doing? You know, they would start talking to each other about, they'd start sharing best practices because they were measured. Management's not even involved now. This is great data. Take the week off. So we start posting it. Numbers start coming up. Then I make the number 10% of management bonus. So now management is really motivated, or somewhat motivated. 10% isn't really, it's somewhat motivated to get involved also and give guidance on the low numbers and give high fives on the high numbers. So the numbers come up a little more. Then we made the numbers 30% of management bonus. And we had different minimums for lunch and dinner for different locations. So it was part of their budget. So, you know, Bloomington, the minimum might be 18.2 at lunch and 18.6 at dinner. That meant that every single server that quarter had to be above that number. Okay? You had to have, you know, you had to be employed for the whole quarter, and you had to have at least X amount of sales for your numbers to count. When we did that, the numbers really came up. Okay? Now, 2004, we started this number. We started looking at it and making it part of management bonus. You know, really making it. We had the number out there before that, but it was then that we started making it part of management bonus. 2004, we had same-store sales declines as a concept. In the chain restaurant world, there's no worse indicator. That means all of the restaurants that you have cumulatively are doing worse combined than those same restaurants were doing the previous year with sales. So we were doing something wrong. 2004 and 2003, we had same-store sales declines. We started looking at that number and making it part of bonus in 2004. 2005, we had same-store sales growth. 2006, we had even more. 2007, even more. And our sales kept increasing. Stayed kind of flat, a little down through the recession, and are increasing again. Much more than our competitors in chain restaurants. Last quarter, most chain restaurants reported same-store sales declines for the third quarter. Okay? We were up 2.5% for the third quarter. The number, when we started looking at it and made it part of management bonus, our company average, and at that point it was on like 35 million in credit card sales, was 17.8%. Okay? Now, in the year 2012, it is 19.7%. That's quite a change on millions of dollars of sales. I've got to believe it's because we're doing something better. But the biggest thing that we did better was let everybody see how they stood on customer satisfaction next to each other. Now, the end of that story is that last bullet point, which I am really, really proud of. Okay? Consumer Reports magazine does a survey, or did a survey in 2012, and they did it in 2009. A reader's poll. Okay, so you had to be a subscriber to do it, and you could only vote once as a subscriber. They had 47,000 subscribers vote on customer satisfaction in chain restaurants. And they scored them on the classic categories. Quality of food, value, ambiance, service, all the things that you go, you know, are important to a restaurant. 2012, this summer, the August issue, a couple months ago, we were the #1 chain restaurant in the United States. #1 in Italian, #1 all concepts, okay? All price points. 2009, they did it. We were #1 in Italian and tied all concepts. We tied with Capital Grille, which is a prime beef, very expensive chain restaurant that's 3 times the price of us. I believe that we have done that. You know, our manuals aren't any better. Our training systems aren't any better. I honestly believe we achieved that because our servers compete for that number because they're measured. They're held accountable on customer satisfaction. And they buy into it because they know if their number goes up, so does their earnings. Data. Really important stuff. It's gotten us a lot. Any questions? What time does this class end, Rich?
11:20.
So we got 5 minutes. Yes, ma'am. Since we're not from Bloomington, Illinois, why did we pick it? It's a great question. My partner Todd is sort of from Bloomington, Illinois. His parents moved there when he was a young man, and they have lived there since. So he was familiar with it. And he was driving down from Chicago all the time going, my gosh, all this money and nothing above Olive Garden. And so that was kind of where the impetus for the business plan came from. And that's where many of the investors in the first round came from. So when we started the company, we said, well, we should probably live in a third-tier market so that our price sensitivity, everything is consistent with those kind of communities. Bloomington has State Farm's world headquarters there, so it has a good airport. You can get in and out of it. And it was a prototypical market, and his parents were there, so we knew it. So it seemed as good a choice as anything. Great question. Anybody else? Well, for those of you in the room considering the restaurant business, it's a great choice. When I got into the business, it was murderous. You know, entry-level jobs were a lot more time and effort and energy and work than they are now. Not that you shouldn't expect to work, but I think the industry has evolved a lot towards working smart, not working hard. And, you know, I'm a 9-to-5 guy. I play hockey twice a week, come home, shower. I'm still in the office by 8. I'm home for dinner. I travel probably 4 nights a month. And I'm a restaurant guy. So you can have that in this business. And it's also a great business to be an entrepreneur in. And you can do that without having money. If you have know-how, write the business plan, be a good leader, work on your leadership, whether it's restaurant or anything else, because that's what's going to make your career go. That's all I got. Thanks for listening.
John, on behalf of HTM, I'd like to give you a small token of our appreciation. Thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule. He'll be up here for a couple minutes. For those of you that didn't feel comfortable asking him a question in front of everybody, I'm sure he'd field questions up here individually. Again, thank you so much.
It's wrapped.
Visit Biaggi's.
Thanks.